so many familiar faces and lots of family members. I feel very comfortable being here. I'm Julie Seghesio Neumiller. I am a fourth generation member of the Seghesio family. At this point, I'm one of the oldest, which is a sad realization. Yeah. But anyways, I'm happy to be here and share my family's stories with you. My recollections are from my father and my grandfather primarily. So if you speak to another Seghesio, you might get a little different story. But these are our family stories. My family came to America my father's grandfather. Let's start over again. My family's history in America began 140 years ago when my great-grandfather, Eduardo, immigrated from Dogliani, Italy, which is located in the north. He was urged to come to America by P.C. Rossi, Pietro Carlo Rossi, a former Dogliani resident and one of the founding fathers of the Italian Swiss colony. About 20 years ago, Brant Rossi, P.C. Rossi's great-grandson, moved next door to us out in Alexander Valley. And when we were welcoming him over the fence, I said, Brant, I feel like my cousins moved in next door. And he said, well, Julie, I am your cousin. And I said, I know my cousins and you're not one of them. And he said, no. He said, in Italy, a Rossi married a Seghesio. And that was the connection. So really, we weren't blood relatives, but we were kissing cousins. When I was done, I did this talk this last summer. And when my talk was done, a lovely woman came up to me and she said, Julie, I am your cousin. I thought, jeez, Louise, I guess I don't know many of my cousins. And so if any of you are my cousin and you think I don't know you, please see me after the talk. But back to the stories. The colony played a big part in my family's history because when P.C. Rossi invited my grandfather to come, he was one of a group of Italian immigrants, farm laborers, who came there. Unlike what Don said, my great-grandfather lived in the cookhouse, had his room and board provided, and worked for 3 years without a check. He worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And at the end of the 3 years, when he was ready to get his big check, his boss, Mr. Vasconi, was giving it to him. And he said, I'm going to use this money to go buy a boat ticket and go back and get a sweetheart that I had left in Italy. And Mr. Vasconi said, well, you could do that, but I have a lovely niece that lives just up the road from the cookhouse, and maybe you should consider meeting her. This was a idea that obviously appealed to Eduardo. Angela, my great-grandmother, had immigrated to America a few years earlier when she was 13. She left Italy malnourished and looking to escape political turmoil. Now that's the sum total of what I knew about why she came. So Don's talk was very interesting to me to hear about the whys that she came to America. She also came with the chain migration. Her sister, who married Mr. Ferrari, came after her, and they all were part of the North County Italian community. Angela was educated for a couple of years at the Washington School in Asti. There she learned English, and in 1893, she and Eduardo were married. It was a May-December union. She was 15 and he was 32. A year later, they began their family with the birth of Ida. She was the first of the 6 children they would have. The colony continued to play a large role in their lives for many years to come. Eduardo continued to work at the colony, honing his grape growing and winemaking skills until 1895. They were then able to purchase a 56-acre tract of land in the Chianti agricultural area for $200 an acre. This ranch, located a few miles south of the colony, became our home ranch. There was already a small vineyard on the property, and there Eduardo built a 2-room cabin with 1x12 redwood boards. Their first year there, they harvested the grapes and they sold them for $12 a ton. As the family prospered, they were able to add on to the cabin and create the beautiful 8-room Victorian that is still standing there today on Highway 101 between Geyserville and Cloverdale. As the family grew, so did their holdings. My grandfather Art, Nono, was proud to say that his parents sealed every deal with a check and a handshake. Eduardo bought properties when he could afford to pay outright for them. He believed if you owned your property outright, then when the hard times came, you were able to weather them. He also believed in buying properties only on rivers because he didn't want to have any water issues with anybody else. So all of the ranches that he bought in his lifetime were on rivers. Like most farm families, they had a big hen house. They raised cattle and sheep on our hill pastures, caught fish from the Russian River that was the eastern border of the home ranch, grew a large vegetable garden surrounded the house with fruit and nut trees, and pigs. Pigs have a large role in our family. My nonna would say that when they had a litter of pigs, they would choose the largest one, and that pig has a very special designation. That pig got extra rations and grew to be very big and very fat. And when he was so fat that he had so much fat on his face that he could barely see out of his eyes, that's when he got his new title. He was now known as the prosciutto pig. So which wasn't a great title to have. So, in 1902, Angela and Eduardo built our original winery on the home ranch. The grapes were crushed by a hand crank crusher. Eduardo ran a bulk wine operation, selling the wine to Italian Swiss colony. The 1906 earthquake's destruction of many of San Francisco's wineries created a demand for Sonoma County wines, causing the prices to rise and prosperity for the local winemakers. By 1907, more wine markets had opened up, including some in New York. This enabled our family to buy an electric-powered crusher from the colony. Now, the business involved the whole family. Sons Frank, Art, and Pete would attend school in the morning and then do livestock and ranch chores in the afternoon. The girls helped in the kitchen and with the bookkeeping. Angela, by this time, had become an astute businesswoman and a very accomplished negotiator. She could see the Chianti train station from the porch. If she saw a man in a suit and tie get off the train, she knew a wine buyer was headed up towards the house. She would give a yell out to the hired hand to kill a chicken, grab some wine, and by the time the wine buyer got to the house, the chicken was in the fry pan and the wine was on the table. By 1918, Eduardo and Angela were clearing about $4,000 a year. They had $80,000 in the bank. The demand for temperance, however, in the USA was growing. In an ill-timed business move in early 1919, they bought the Italian Swiss colony for $127,000. The down payment was $75,000. Now they are credited with saving the Italian Swiss colony from being turned into a 1,500-acre sheep ranch. But in October of 1919, prohibition was declared the law of the land. Families were allowed to make 200 gallons of wine for their own personal use, but all the wineries were shut down. Angela and Eduardo solely owned Italian Swiss colony for 1 year only. Then they started selling shares to other investors. Now, I have a good prohibition story. In September of 1922, 3 federal agents, Crawford, Meyer, and Curtis, were on the hunt for bootleggers. They suspected wine being transported in the dead of night, and they set up a stakeout north of Geyserville, hoping to apprehend anyone transporting wine, especially wine coming from the colony. At 3 a.m., along comes a truck filled with wine. A chase ensued. The agents then tracked the truck's tire tracks to the driveway of the home ranch. The driver got out of his truck, ran into the kitchen with the gun-toting federal agents on his heels. Now, this is where the story's a little fuzzy. For some reason, my great-grandfather, Eduardo, and my grandfather, Art, were sitting at the table eating bread and drinking wine at 3 a.m. in the morning. I wonder why. So, by the time Angela heard the commotion, Eduardo and Art were in handcuffs. So, they later, in court, Agent Crawford claimed that he had demanded records from Eduardo. Eduardo's son-in-law was Enrico Prati, and he was a bigwig at Italians' colony. So Eduardo had called him up and asked him to please bring down the records and bring them down to the home ranch. Crawford in court alleged that Prati had offered him a $10,000 payoff to not arrest Eduardo and Art for bootlegging. However, the next morning, Prati, son-in-law of Eduardo, had his attorney inform the U.S. intelligence officers in San Francisco that the federal agents had demanded a bribe, and Prati had the promissory note to prove it. It took 2 years, but Agent Crawford was eventually found guilty and sentenced to 18 months in Leavenworth. The family's good name was restored. 50 years later, at our Thanksgiving table, my sister was doing a history project when she was in college. And she tried to interview my nono about this incident. He was still too traumatized to talk about it. And I don't think they had to go to San Francisco for the court dates, but I don't think he only went there because he was made to go. And I don't think he ever went to San Francisco again. There is another unfortunate event that happened during Prohibition. In 1931, the family still had about 50,000 gallons of wine stored in the winery. Federal officials decided the wine was now unfit to drink and needed to be destroyed. 2 federal agents came to supervise the destruction. The wine was dumped on the dry land behind the winery. Some of it found its way into a nearby creek that led to the Russian River. The next day, the river ran red, marinating and killing the fish. Prohibition ended in 1933. Eduardo died after a 2-week illness in 1934. He had come to America with nothing. He spoke very little English, but he married a smart woman. He was very frugal, and he raised a large, hardworking family. He died a prosperous and respected man. He left all of his holdings to Angela, and overnight his 3 sons became winemakers. At first, the learning curve was steep, but by 1936, good red wine was again being made at the home ranch. Okay. In 1941, Angela turned the business over to her children. The bulk wine market was strong. In 1949, while my mother and father were on their honeymoon, the family purchased Alta Vineyards Winery, which was located on Grove Street in Healdsburg. They bought it on the courthouse steps for $75,000. The winery had a railroad spur, perfect for shipping wine by rail. Angela was happy to see her 23-year-old grandson, Edward, my father, take over the management of this 1 million-gallon capacity facility. My father would boast that he ran this winery with the help of 1 hired man, and that they did the work of 10 men. Grapes and wine were not the only sources of income for the family. Prunes had been planted on most of the ranches, and the family had built dehydrators at the River Road Ranch in Cloverdale. Now, if you grew up in Healdsburg, between the 40s and the 70s, you have prune picking stories for sure. Yeah, so, and mine is that I hated picking prunes. However, however, I did save every cent and I bought a horse and with my money. Now, he wasn't much of a horse, but I loved him. And what was more important was he taught me a good lesson about working hard and achieving a goal. The other thing that the family did that was a source of income was that we gravel mined out of the Russian River. And a lot of that gravel went into the building of the 101 in the North County. When Angela died in 1958, the family owned 350 acres of grapes and prunes and 2 wineries. By the late 70s, 3rd and 4th generation grandsons were joining the family trade. Peter, son of Pete and Rachel Ann Seghesio, took over as general manager, and Ted, my brother, became the winemaker. The desire for a new direction, and it was time for us to put our own name on our label. The desire for this new direction took some serious convincing on the part of Peter and Ted. The bulk market had been good to the previous 3 generations, but thankfully Ted and Peter prevailed. In 1995, we celebrated 100 years of growing grapes with the Century on the Vine party. 200 wine dignitaries, friends and family came to enjoy good food and wine with us under the oaks at our home ranch, where it had all begun. Unfortunately, it was 115 degrees that day. We had an ambulance parked nearby, just in case. In 1996, the lower half of the Healdsburg plant burned to the ground. Some people were camping under the aprons by the spur where the tank cars were parked when Dad was shipping wine. While the fire was raging through the buildings that were built on 100-year-old timbers, looters came on the property to try and steal equipment from my younger brother's maintenance shop. The fire did allow the family, the fire and the fire insurance, did allow the family to rethink what needed to happen at the Healdsburg facility. Healdsburg at that point was positioning itself to become the wine tasting mecca it is today. It made sense to now put a tasting room, event center, and corporate offices at the Healdsburg plant. We also celebrated many of our family's heritage as winery events. Here's where pigs come back into the story. Each December, we shared our family sausage recipe at our very popular wine club sausage days. One of these days was set aside for making sausage with grape growers, distributors, and business associates. Everyone would leave with a full belly of sausage, risotto, and wine, and a big package of sausage to serve with their holiday meals. In the summer, we would host the Porco Festival, an intimate picnic on the banks of the Russian River at the home ranch for 300 attendees. The family would roast 6 to 8 pigs on spits. Lots of good food and wine was enjoyed, and we would dance the night away. My son, when he was about 7, we scoop him up at the end of the Porco, and he was dirty and sweaty and marshmallow all over him and everything. And we were putting him in the car, and he looked up at me and he said, "Mom, this is my best day." And and we all felt that. It was a wonderful party. My father epitomized all of the lessons his grandfather Eduardo had set down for our family. Dad began working in the vineyards when he was 10. He ran the Healdsburg winery to the best of his ability for decades. He hosted hundreds of lunches with wine folk of all kinds at his kitchen table. He was an excellent cook, like his mother and his grandmother. He retired in his 80s, but he continued to work a day a week in the tasting room, signing bottles and sharing our story with anyone who was patient enough to listen, until the pandemic forced him to quit when he was 93. Like his grandfather and father, he enjoyed all of the perks of being a successful grape grower and a winemaker. Angela's and Eduardo's legacy continues. My son, Ned, a 5th-generation family member, is now director of viticulture at Seghesio. He is joined by 5 other great-grandchildren who work in the Sonoma County wine industry. I want to thank you for being here. It's been my pleasure to share my family with you. I've enjoyed my visit with the old guard, now long gone. I hope you have too. Thank you.